Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. How's it going tonight?
If I was doing, every day's a party, Steve. Every day is a freaking party.
A party is one way to describe it, but you know what? Things look up. The more you approach things with gratitude and the more positive attitude you have, the more things look positive, even when things might be kind of rocky.
So you know what's interesting? I had an opportunity to do some serious reflection where I had I spent some dedicated attention into trying to think about constructive ways to think about problems. And I came up with two things. One was gratitude, absolutely, because I mean, part of it is like, for me, it's a pretty natural fit, right? If people stop having problems, like if all of a sudden all the world's technical problems ended tomorrow, I'd be out of a job. So that would suck. So to a degree, I am grateful for problems. But you know what the other word that I've started to try to introduce to that, Steve? Curiosity. Because you can get frustrated with problems, right? But the other thing, I find things like, there are times where things break or people make decisions that I'm like, that's fascinating. Like, why somebody would do that? Why somebody would allow that? Why somebody would make that choice is fascinating. And I find human behavior to be captivating in and of itself. And so approaching it with curiosity has served me well. It's kind of pivoted my point of view on things for sure.
I mean, I was expecting you to say, here's the thing, but you just didn't. So I'm a little disappointed.
Well, can't have you disappointed. Let's dig into some feedback and see if we can impress you.
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in from David. David writes in and says, I have a Proxmox server. It's running on a Dell R420, and it has a total of 5 drives. I have the majority running on spinning Rust, while the operating system and an image server are on the 2 SSDs. I'd like to install an SSD as a cache drive. The main 2 storage drives are a ZFS and a Mir. Would I be required to use the 2 SSDs as cache drives, or is one enough? I was going to replace all the drives with SSD, but we all know why that didn't happen. I have 1 spinning Rust drive as a backup, but is it adequate for that purpose? And will be replaced when I can. I was thinking of using a PCI NVMe adapter card as a cache drive, but I haven't found enough info if it be compatible with my setup. Thanks, David. So, Steve, talk to me about what a cache drive is. What is a cache drive, and do you need 2 or is 1 enough?
Well, so let's start off by saying if David was here in person, I would start a discovery process asking a bunch of questions. But since David isn't here, we'll have to make some assumptions on his behalf.
Show starts at 6, David. Where are you at?
Right?
Okay, we'll let it go this time.
So one of the first thing is terminology is always trouble, especially when you get we'll say vague or overloaded terminology like a cache drive. So this can mean different things to different people, and so we're going to have to make some assumptions as to what this means. From the context, what I would assume that they mean is like a drive where you store hot data, and then serve that data from there and have some way to sync it back and forth.
So the problem, just in case somebody isn't tracking or is new to this stuff, the problem at its core is you can get yourself into a situation where you have more data you're trying to write than the limitation of the drive throughput will allow, and so you got data that is stacking up on top of one another. And so the idea is to give it a temporary right place to go write the data to until you can write it to the main pool. Is that an accurate summation of the problem we're trying to solve?
It could be. Like I said, that's where the discovery aspect comes in, because maybe David knows some of the the features inside of ZFS, or maybe David has just heard about caching drives or having a cache available, like a hot cache, because there's things like Redis and other caches out there that do accelerate things. And maybe we're coming from that perspective. So from a ZFS perspective, there's really only two options that you have when you're adding disks as an additional performant layer. So the first one is a ZIL or a slog, and the second is an L2 ARC. And we'll kind of pull those apart a little bit. The ZIL is a ZFS intent log. And what this is for is it will cache all of the writes that are happening to a drive if the writes are synchronous. Okay, so it's meant for capturing, writing down the things that should be written to disk. If the calling program, like NFS or like a database, is synchronous. Asynchronous writes completely bypass this, so it's not going to help you. The purpose of this is you write your intent log in order to release a bunch of data at the same time. Instead of pinging your spinning Rust and moving that head all over the place, the ZIL will spool up the intents over a 5-second period and then flush them to disk. And so it takes some of that latency approach away, because you've got a faster disk that is writing on, it's writing the intent for what should go to the disk, as opposed to waiting for the spinning disk, right? So a slog is very similar to this. It's a separate log device, and it moves a bunch of the metadata and the logging that ZFS takes care of to a different device. In both cases, whether you're going with a ZIL or a slog or both, because you really want to maximize getting that metadata off that spinning disk, you should be mirroring these, because there are small disks, right? So I use a pair of 128 gig Intel Enterprise SSDs that you can pick up those used, and even brand new. They're not like ridiculously expensive, because nobody wants the small ones anymore. And the reason for this is because you need high level of write endurance, because you don't want your logs to go away. Like that metadata, if it disappeared, would be unfortunate. It's not going to break anything, but you probably are going to have a bad time if that just disappears unexpectedly. So there's that. The other thing that happens inside of ZFS is it has what's called the adaptive replacement cache. By default, the very first layer of that lives in RAM. And essentially, this is the section of RAM that is used to store hot data. It's attempting to determine ahead of time what data you might call for. So like if you're calling a VMDK or like a QCOW file or whatever, it's got a pretty good idea of what blocks you're going to ask for next, and it'll pull that into RAM so it can serve them more quickly. When you run out of RAM, the ARC starts to get evacuated, and maybe the data that you want is no longer in RAM. So an option for that is to put faster disks than what you have as an L2 ARC. And essentially the L2 ARC handles the spillover for anything that doesn't fit in RAM. So whether you need to extend your ARC with an L2 ARC really depends on the workload. Okay, so that's what's really important. The L2 ARC is not going to help you with everything. If you've got a bunch of stuff and it fits all into RAM, and your ARC is largely doing cache hits and not doing a bunch of dumps, there's a bunch of stats that we don't have time to go into. But if you go look up, how do I know if I need to have a bigger ARC or an L2 ARC, there are a bunch of stats that talk about cache hits and misses and how to predict when you need that. If you end up having workloads that benefit from that, an L2 ARC can help you. The other benefit is if you stick in an L2 ARC and it disappears, that's not that, it's really not that big of a deal, because you'll essentially, that data was just waiting to be asked for by a client. And so what will happen is if the ARC just drops off the face of the planet, all of a sudden it'll just pull that from disk. So it's not that big of a deal. You'll have some performance hitches if you were in production at like a large company, but in your home, you're probably not going to notice that too much.
It'll be fine. Okay. Anything else to add or to define, or terms to define?
I think that pretty much covers my knowledge of ZFS and what you might use caching for.
So it will be really helpful, David, if you ever have an opportunity to join us live. We can kind of we can bat this around with you in real time. Here's the other thing we would tell you is that, to a degree, any one of these things, Steve and I will be able to give you some basic stuff on. But any one of these things, you take databases, there are people like Brandon Kessler who know more about databases than the people at Oracle who make them, right? And so getting into that level is it just takes a lot. With storage, same thing, right? There are the Alan Judes of the world that are going to be able to tell you more about storage than we're ever going to be able to. So to a degree, help us understand what you're after, and we can kind of guide you in the right direction, but just know this stuff gets really deep really fast. Here's another thing we thought we'd bring to your attention. I was working on a fairly complex story. Well, it's not really complex, but it needed to get done right the first time. Let's put it that way. That's maybe the best way to describe it. And so I couldn't afford a mistake. And I reached out to a company called Boardroom Technologies. And we'll have a link for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. But basically, they were really helpful at being able to say, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, here's what I want to do, and here's my budget. And they were able to kind of work backwards and say, okay, Noah, here's what you want to spend, and here's what you're trying to get done. Here's what we would suggest to be able to do that. And so they took my problem, packaged it literally into a UPS shipping thing, got me within $100 under my budget, and a UPS package showed up with exactly what I needed, and we were able to take it out of the thing, and all the parts were there and all the things. So if you're ever looking for somebody to come alongside you and give you a cost-effective, like the advice is free, like they'll help you sort through a problem, no problem. And then if I would encourage you in the strongest possible terms to then turn around and support them, spend your money with them. But if you need equipment, if you need, in my case, I was buying a drive shelf, but if you need something from them, they'd be happy to do that for you. You can learn more at boardroomtechnologies.com. Our second email comes in from Araya. Araya writes in and says, hi, Noah and Steve. You guys have a great show. I've got Home Assistant backing up to a dedicated user on Nextcloud. It was going well until I realized that I was running out of space on Nextcloud. Turns out Home Assistant was set to only save the most recent 5 days. That's good. But my trash bin in Nextcloud was set to retain everything forever. So my trash bin exploded. Steve, did you ever see the movie Galaxy Quest?
Yes, a long time ago.
We're going to have to rewatch that. There's a line in there, and then it exploded. I set my global rule in Nextcloud to retain files in the trash bin for up to 30 days for all users, but ideally, I'd like to only retain the most recent 5 days of backup in Home Assistant. Is there a way to set up the max trash bin retention time per user in Nextcloud? Alternatively, is there a better method for my backups? I asked Claude, but he made up some environment variables that don't even exist. Following up on my question, I think Nextcloud might not be the best backup location for Home Assistant. I found an SFTP integration that works with Home Assistant backups. I'll give that a try and see what happens. So Steve, let's work backwards from this. If you were backing up your Home Assistant configuration file, how'd you go about doing that?
I dump it to a NAS on an NFS share.
Do you do that within Home Assistant, or do you crawl in there and snatch the files externally and then?
No, Home Assistant has a section for attaching external storage to it, and it actually even recognizes that it's dumping to a NAS. At least mine does.
Okay, so maybe we're overthinking this then. You may not even necessarily need an SFTP integration. You might just be able to point it towards a NAS share and say, oi, dump it here.
I mean, that's what I do.
Okay, all right. So let's take this a little bit further. So if you were Araya and your choices were either to use an SFTP integration or use Nextcloud, let me ask you this. You do use Nextcloud to back up, you were using Nextcloud to back up photos. Maybe you still are.
Sort of. We moved to NT, and so there is some integration with, if you've got pictures somewhere on your desktop or your laptop or whatever, they get sucked up by Nextcloud. But no, we've largely moved to NT and then dumping those to the NAS, because NT has a constant export feature on the desktop client.
Okay, but I guess my point in getting at that was that you wouldn't say that Nextcloud is an inappropriate tool to do backups.
I wouldn't. I'm still having a hard time. Like, I guess, does Home Assistant dump them to disk and then a Nextcloud client picks them up? I'm not exactly sure how that process functions. I have used similar things, but not for Nextcloud, for other types of backups, like, for example, dumping server configs or ESP Home configs or Tasmota configs to disk where Nextcloud is looking, and it just picks those up. So I absolutely have done that.
So he links in the show notes a thing to like a little cron job where he's basically saying, hey, go this directory and then clean up things that are in the trash bin. What do you think of that approach?
Are you talking about the thing that I dropped in the
Oh, is
show
that you
notes?
put that in there? Okay.
I approve.
I came up with it. I like my answer. Yes, I do.
Yeah. I also linked the documentation for Nextcloud about the trash bin configuration. As far as I know, you can't do a per user trash bin configuration. You can do a global one, which is why I dropped the cron job in there, because the way I would solve this would just be a cron job, because essentially you're just calling the OCC client to run the trash bin cleanup on a specific user.
Our third email comes in from Tony. Tony writes in and says, hi, Steve and Noah. I've been listening to the show for a long time, and I really enjoy it. I often hear you guys talk about automating your homes with Home Assistant and how much your wives enjoy it. That is something I'm trying to achieve. I want to build things that are not just interesting to me, but actually useful and appreciated at home. I've done several basic things like lighting, but that feels pretty simple and can often be handled with just timers. I'm more interested in meaningful automation that can improve my day-to-day life. What are your top 5 automations or enhancements that you would recommend for most people? Also, any suggestions to use more off-the-shelf hardware, but still stay open and flexible? That'd be great. Thanks for the great show, Tony. So we bat this around briefly in our pre-show, and I thought for sure Steve and I were going to have come totally opposite answers, because we've in the past had opposite approaches to this, and I was surprised to learn we're actually pretty close to on the same page. So what have you learned in doing home automation, Steve? How would you coach Tony if he's getting into this, and what would you say your years of home automating have done, particularly when it's not for you, Steve, but when it's for others?
When it's for others, I found that my tastes are things like, my mother-in-law hates my automations because she just does. She doesn't, just doesn't work for her. My mom is much more tolerant of it, but they also would not prefer the way that we set it up. Like, I don't know if we've just become accustomed to it, or Rosanna is just very gracious, but she doesn't ever complain about the automations as long as they're working properly, right? If she knows what they're supposed to do and they're working properly, she knows how they work and knows what to expect, she doesn't complain. But my parents and my in-laws, they definitely do not expect their house to be reacting the way I expect my house to react.
So many, many years ago, in order to install the Radio Raw system, I had to sit for a class. And it's the only way that Lutron will let you become a dealer is if you take one of their classes. And it was largely referred to online as kind of a nonsense class. And then there's, of course, that one guy that's like, no, it's super useful. You learn lots of stuff that's necessary to do it right. And I couldn't disagree more. I think I can figure out how to click through the UI with or without somebody telling me. So wasn't helpful for that. But where it was really helpful is they helped guide you through things that nerds don't necessarily land on. And so, for example, not all things that are possible are wise. And that's particularly true with home automation. And so one of the things that they talked about is very few people have consistent habits. So if you think, even if they tell you, I want my lights to come on because we're always home by 6 o'clock at night. And so I want the lights to come on. And then we're always in bed by 9 o'clock at night. So we can shut all the lights off. We can schedule a shut off at 9 o'clock at night. Even if they're telling you that, you don't listen to them. And here's why. They don't even realize that their schedule is going to change. And that works fine for the first 5, 10, 15 nights, 20, whatever it is. But at some point, they're going to come home an hour early or an hour late. At some point, they're going to be on a critical call with their daughter who just got into a car accident, and all of a sudden all the lights in the bedroom go out because it's 9 o'clock and they always go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. Didn't happen, right? So people are terrible at anticipating their own habits, and they change constantly. And so when it comes to automation, if you want it to be approachable to your wife, if you want it to be approachable to your family, the key here is less is more. So some things to start with. You say that you can start with lights and timers, and I would say that's probably 50% true. But I think you'll get a lot further with occupancy sensors, right? One of the things I've gotten consistent feedback, everything from in my own house to businesses, particularly when it comes into things like restrooms, occupancy sensors to turn the lights on. People love, again, and particularly in bathrooms, not having to touch a wall. And you walk in and the light's just on. Nobody wants to be standing inside of a dark room. And so hallways, entryways, kitchen, living room, the bedrooms are a bit of a mixed bag. One school of thought of automation would say, don't automate turning lights on in a bedroom because that's only going to lead to, if something fails, it's 2 a.m. and they're in the middle of sleep and all of a sudden bright lights come on, it's bad. However, there are ways that you can do it. Steve, can you talk a little bit about your the way that you make absolutely sure if an automation is going to fire that there's actually a live human to gosh being in the room?
So the bedroom is has been a long journey, just because you think you get it right and then you hit an edge case or whatever, and then you don't. So in the bedroom, I have 2 bed sensors, like one per, let me rephrase that. I have 4 bed sensors, but they're in pairs. So 2 on one side of the bed and 2 on the other side of the bed. I have 2 motion sensors. I have power sensing on the room itself. I have power sensing on the TV. I have a lux sensor in the room, all of which are indications of persons in the room. And to your point about having an automation misfire, the automations stop in the room at like 11 p.m. except for turning the lights off. So we have there's a bedtime routine where we have these buttons where if you push and hold them, it'll turn on the TV and then turn it to like the daytime brightness. And if you double click them, it will turn the TV down to like nighttime brightness. And then it sets a 30-minute timer and walks the lights down in steps until they're as low as the lights will go. And then the lights will go off. So any of the automations that walk the lights off will continue to work past 11 p.m. But the things that turn the lights on, they don't happen. No automatic lights happen between 11 and like 6:30 or something like that, because we had one night, and of course it's always when you're away, when I'm away, where something failed and I couldn't diagnose what had failed remotely, and it kept the lights on. It didn't matter what Rosanna did, walked over to the switch or whatever, the lights would come back on. To this day, I don't know what was causing that, but that caused me to introduce a time of day sensor also into my automation flow. So there's a bunch of stuff that I've kind of have like eject handles. So I also use inside of Home Assistant, there are these helpers, so input booleans, and I call those overrides, like I name them override. And if the override is on, the automation doesn't fire. And so there's a bunch of stuff that I do in that way to give eject handles that allows for a more pleasant experience, because like you said, most of the time you might want the light to go off, but in the same time there might be times where it doesn't see you, or you want the light to always be on or always be on full brightness. Because one of the tricks that I use around the house is, instead of turning the light off immediately, what happens is the light will walk to a dimmer thing as an indication that you've stopped being sensed in the room. Right? So you can wave your arms, but even that might get annoying. So overrides help to prevent that.
100%. Here's something else I'd point out. What has gone really well in the Chelaya house is buttons for all the things. And so it started with I mimicked. In fact, I'm really proud of the amount of thought and effort I put into mimicking a normal light switch. And so by default, if you go into any room, there are 6 buttons. There is the very top light button, which turns the lights all the way on. There's a middle one, which turns the lights to dim. And there's the bottom one, which turns the light, you guessed it, off. On the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, is lights to get you access to all the light scenes, media to control the sound system, and I think it's HVAC to control like the temperature stuff. And that's it. That's all that's there is those 6 buttons. And so by default, I've yet to have somebody walk into my house that can't figure that out. Where they walk in, they're like, I want to turn the lights on. Well, I hit the big bright light bulb thing and it turns the lights on. Shocking, right? Then once I got everybody more or less trained, I hate to use that word, but this is the word that comes to mind. Once I got everybody trained, then I started taking requests. And so my daughter is in jazz dance and and she's taking dance lessons. And so she has a song that she's working on. She's like, Dad, I want a button that I can start my music, my dance routine, and I want it to, wait a certain amount of time so I can get to the floor and then start the song or whatever, and then I can restart. I'm like, okay, no problem. So then we started getting into, okay, I'm going to give each person in the family a button, and then they get a page, and they can reconfigure that panel for them. And the specific hardware that I'm using to do this is made by my friend Thomas at Orbit Panels. You can learn more at orbitpanels.com. And essentially what Orbit Panels are, they're stellar solutions for down-to-earth control. Thomas had a problem. He's worked full-time for a church for going on 10 years. Before that, he was a design engineer at an AV company. And, it was the problem that he ran into was he dealt with churches that had these super complex automation systems. And when you have a technical person in the room and you want to control all the things all the time, it's awesome. Problem is, when that tech person isn't there, when Steve leaves the house, when Noah leaves the house, you need pardon my language here, but you need an idiot mode. And so it's just, I need the lights on. I need the lights off. I want the lights dimmer. And it needs to be really super simple and stripped down. And so what he has a nicer way of saying it. He calls it the janitor buttons. But basically he needed the ability to do basic light presets for janitors when he wasn't there to do his tech thing. And so he looked into commercial solutions, and they were thousands and thousands of dollars. And he's like, well, this is stupid. Elgato makes the Stream Deck. Certainly there's a way to tear this thing apart. And so he spent, I want to say 2-3 years digging apart, like taking the thing apart, figuring out different ways. How is it going to work? How is it going to fit? And he had some very specific requirements. He wanted it to fit into a single gang light box. He wanted it to be PoE powered. He wanted it to be plug and play. So you didn't have to, it didn't look like a bad science project. It was like a product. And so he developed the Orbit Panels. He did it in an entirely open source friendly way. So if you say, I have a desire for this thing, but I don't have the money, you can go to orbitpanels.com, click on the DOI instructions. He's got a YouTube video, and he links all of the parts. So you can just go down the list and amazon.com yourself, all of the parts. If you are lazy like I am lazy, you can also just go to the product page, click on the Orbit Panel you want, the Orbit Panel Mini, which is the 6-button, it looks like a normal light switch, the Orbit Panel 15, which is what I typically use, and the Orbit Panel XL, which is for beast mode. And he'll sell you an entire completed deal. He 3D prints the case. He'll put all of the pieces together. He'll assemble it. He'll flash the software onto it for you. It runs an open source piece of software called BitFocus Companion, and he ship it to you. And you literally just take a PoE cable and you plug it in. And so at this point, they are all over my house. We've also used them inside of installs where we've come across places that had like a Crestron system or some very specific proprietary like URC thing that had gone out or was going to be thousands of dollars to replace or to add to it. And we're like, yeah, just get rid of that and we'll put an Orbit panel in for $350. You'll be on your way. And they've been absolutely flawless. And my litmus test on this, when we first put them in, was how it was going to work for my wife. Because if it was, I was a little bit hesitant to have something running on a computer and if it was going to work. And literally the only problem I've ever had has nothing to do with the Orbit panels whatsoever. And it has to do with the fact that on my vHost that is running my companion server, I have a bad RAM slot. And when the power goes out and the server restarts, I have to plug a keyboard in and press F1. And if it wasn't, and that's a NOAA problem. It's not an Orbit panel problem. But past that one small, tiny little exception, there has never, ever been a problem with the Orbit panels. They work flawlessly 100% of the time. And make it really approachable to people that aren't interested in home automation, but it exposes the entirety of Home Assistant behind buttons. And so you can just, on the fly, say, I want a button to do a thing. So we'll have a link for you of Orbit panels. You can learn more at orbitpanels.com. We'll have a link for you at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our fourth piece of feedback comes in via the Geek Lab. Hey, did you know that there is a robot that is like a sentinel? He sits there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days year, and all this robot does is watches for your feedback, and the second it detects the feedback, it snatches it up and puts it into the show doc for us. So 2Bit did that. He tagged Marlon in the geeklab:/linuxdelta.com and said, I'm looking for a self-hosted SIP server to work with my Axis A8105 door station, preferably something that can run in Docker. Any suggestions? So I have two. I guess I don't know for sure that these run in containers. It's not my preferred way of doing things, but your mileage may vary. So the first, the go-to, the thing that's been around for, it's got to be 2 decades at this point, is FreePBX. So FreePBX built on top of Asterisk is open source phone server. It is no frills. It will just work right out of the box. It does everything you need it to do. But it's got some cruft to it by way of being a piece of software that's been around for 20 years. So, I wouldn't necessarily put it on the internet. There's lots and lots and lots of people that are out there knocking on Asterisk servers. And so unless you have failed to ban, you couple it with some stuff, I'd be a little hesitant to put it on the internet. But if you're just looking for something to put in your house and you want the doorbell to ring another station or something, FreePBX all day long. You can learn more at freepbx.org. The second is a newcomer, and it's my new go-to for open source PBX software, and it is FSPBX. F as in Frank, S as in Sierra. FSPBX is the world's best open source PBX. It's an advanced open source PBX solution built on top of FreeSwitch. It started as a fork of Fusion PBX, but is extensively redesigned to deliver a modern, powerful, user-friendly experience. So essentially, I'm looking at you, 3CX. It is an open source replacement for when you want a really great UI specifically designed for VoIP providers in mind. It supports being white label ready. It's designed from the ground up to be a solution for multi-tenancy, allowing to host multiple instances on a single system, each tenant completely separated, different database, different dial plan, the whole 9 yards. It supports different URLs, all the things. And so we have a test instance up that we've been playing with. The other thing that I think is really cool, they do this a number of different ways. They do the open source thing, community support, free bug reports on GitHub, free forever, all of the things. You download it and you use it. That's really what 3CX should have been until they screwed it up. The second is what they call their basic plan, and it's ideal for small providers that need some help. So they'll give you some support. This is what, if you're just doing this in your house for a door station, don't worry about this. But if you're using it as a business, highly recommend you do this. It's $300 a month, but what that gets you is up to 3 hours of technical support, email or phone call, feature development, and then they give you some access to some premium modules. Thing I like about that is that you're supporting the company that is doing this. So check them out, fspbx.com. You can learn more by going to podcast.asknoahshow.com.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of April 26th, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. Kdenlive 26.04 is out. The Midori browser has released version 11.7. BleachBit 6.0 is now available. QEMU 11.0 is out. The LXQT team has announced the release of LXQT 2.4. Firefox 150 is now available. And Thunderbird 150 is also available. In open source distro news, Ubuntu 26.04 has been announced. Fedora 44 has been released. Tails 7.7 is now available. In open source security news, Vect 2.0 is a ransomware that irreversibly destroys files over 131 kilobytes on Windows, Linux, and ESXi, and unfortunately, they cannot be recovered. Easily exploitable pack to the root Linux vulnerability leads to root access. And the threat actor known as Harvester has been attributed to a new Linux version of its Gogra backdoor deployed as a part of attacks likely targeting entities in South Asia. And lastly, in open source AI news, Chinese AI companies have been active. DeepSeek open sources V4 of their large language model series, Moonshot AI open sources Kimi K2.6, and Alibaba Qwen team has released Qwen 3.6 27B, a dense open weight model outperforming its own 397 billion parameter model that was a mixture of experts.
So this week, somebody using a Cursor agent snuffed out a production database. Steve, for those of us who have been kind of sleeping under a bridge, talk to me about what Cursor is. Talk to me about what Opus is. Talk to me about what an agent is and how these tools are designed to be used. Then we'll talk about what didn't go so well.
Sure. So really easily, Cursor is an IDE that was forked from VS Code and is supported by a company. I think it's been bought up now. It was a startup and it was bought by somebody, I think, or at least the deal was announced. And it is a AI first, I suppose. I guess that's how you would say it. It's meant to have it essentially has a panel for talking to some sort of AI. It's got your regular file browser, and then in the center panel, it's got your files that you would work on, and it's got a terminal. Like I said, very similar to VS Code. So that's what Cursor is. Cursor allows you to change the models, and then I'm not exactly sure what their pricing model is for that, because I get mine through work. So, for example, from work, my work curates the models that I have access to. And so I have access to Sonnet, Opus, GPT, Codex, and something called Composer. So then you asked, what is Opus? Opus right now is, in my opinion, the cream of the crop when it comes to AI models that are out there. It's made by Anthropic, and it is exceptionally good from my experience. Is it perfect? No. Does it hallucinate things? Sometimes. Is it the bee's knees? I think it's pretty good. I really do. I think that when I use Opus, I see the potential that the AI hypists like to talk about. So that's what that is. An agent is the ability for the browser, or if you're running OpenClaw or Multis or any of those sorts of things, the idea of an agent is there is a model that is the orchestrator. It basically interprets the request that you send it, however you send it to it, and determines how should I action this. And it might have one or many other AI models depending on what their strengths are and how they're configured. And it will read the intent behind what you've given it and then determine who should go off and do the work. There are some AI models that are really good at researching and some that are excellent at following exactly the information they've given and all that sort of stuff. So they all kind of have things that they're very good at. And so in this case, what appears to have happened is Opus was being used as the orchestrating. So someone is chatting to the AI in Cursor. Can we talk for
Can we talk for just a second? So inside of Cursor, can you explain the different modes, like the planning and agent mode, and how it's designed to be used?
Sure. So inside of Cursor, there are 4 modes, and you'll find these broadly accepted across various tools. There's an agent mode, which is go do the thing. And generally speaking, agent mode is meant as a one-shot. What is a one-shot? A one-shot is where you give it a prompt and then expect it to go figure out the rest. This is the generically the way that people think about using AI. I just open up a browser or I open up a chat terminal and I type what I want to happen, and then it goes and figures it out and does the thing. So that's what an agent does. It goes and tries to execute on what you've done based on its understanding of what you have told it. Now, in agent mode, you can set it to like, don't ever ask me, just do the thing you think. You can tell it to prompt you. There's all kinds of things, right? And so when I use Cursor, I tell it, one of the instructions I give it is, if you have questions, ask me. Don't make an ambiguous choice. Prompt the user for more information. And so I tend to get my workflow stopped a lot because it ends up waiting for me and I don't notice, or I miss the notification or whatever. You can turn that off, which is what a lot of people do. So they like, go do the thing and don't bother me. So that's one mode. Planning mode is where it's supposed to be a read-only type activity where it goes and introspects the thing. So for example, I want a Node-RED flow that tells me when I'm using the most amount of power. And when that happens, I want to get a notification in Telegram that tells me, hey, I got to go shut stuff off because I'm pulling too much power off the grid, right? That could be an example of a prompt that you would give a plan. What the planning agent does is, instead of trying to execute about that, it would go, well, it potentially goes, depends on how smart it is and all the access you give it. But essentially, in my case, I have a read-only token that I might give it to Home Assistant, because that's where my stuff lives. And it would go and introspect Home Assistant and figure out what sensors I have, what time of day, how's my power draw, like all of that sort of stuff. Then the planning agent will actually write that information down and codify it. Like, step 1, I need to do this. I think I should attempt doing it like this with this Python module or this Go module or whatever it is, right? Kind of at a high level. So it'll say things like, I found these sensors. I think I want to use these sensors. I'm going to use this in order to validate what I've said. Then step 2 is, I'm going to compare it to this. I'm going to make sure that my units are sanitized. So it basically breaks down a whole bunch of steps, and may even give you code snippets of what it's actually going to attempt to try. And it gives itself instructions about how should it implement things, where are my credentials, what kind of output I should expect. Almost creating like a spec. So it just essentially, the purpose of planning mode is to create a document that an agent or another AI orchestrator will walk through to get the result.
Sure.
And that tends to have the best results, because it's the difference between, and I really mean this kind of truly, it's the difference between telling your 10-year-old, go do a thing and tell me when you're done, versus like, here is the plan I want you to follow. These are the generic steps that you are going to walk through, and don't come back to me until you have achieved all these steps. And so that is what planning mode is. Okay,
so we have a pretty good idea of what Cursor is. We have a pretty, and so to get access to Opus, you would go to like Claude.com, you would contact their sales thing or sign up for a plan, and you would either do their free tier, which I don't actually think gets you API access. I think you have to use their little web thing to chat with it or whatever, or you can do their like pro thing for like $17 a month, or their max thing for $100 a month. Once you have a subscription to their AI model, then you can sign in to that AI model or connect that API to Cursor, and then now you can use the IDE of Cursor powered by the AI to go do things. So instead of where we typically think of like chatting with a bot, I can work with my IDE as if it can do things like SSH into machines and execute code and make changes to systems and reach out and touch things and those sorts of things. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I'd make one tiny tweak that Cursor makes its money by being a reseller. So by default, it wants you to use the models through them, and then it puts a little surcharge. If you're an advanced user, you can get in there and twiddle some of the settings and inject your own keys and stuff like that. it can be done, but the main path that they want is like sign into Cursor, give us your credit card, and then we will provide access to the models for you.
Okay. Well, in some ways that's easier. Then you don't necessarily go model shopping. So install Cursor, put your credit card in, decide what model you want, pay the requisite fee, get to work, kind of a thing.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So that's exactly what Jeremy Crane did. And then he spent the weekend recovering from a data extinction event that was caused by the coding agent in less than 10 seconds. Tell me what happened here.
I only kind of parsed through the story kind of at a high level, but essentially he gave it some instructions. He didn't put enough gates in it. Like he essentially let it loose and did not tell it to prompt him. And it went through, made some bad choices, and decided to delete things. So I'll give you a little anecdote from my personal life.
Yes.
I don't know if I shared this on the air or not.
You didn't, I don't think.
So I was working with a model and it had been going pretty well. And I wanted to have it do something inside of Home Assistant. I wanted to respond to, remember how I said, like, you get an alert if, you're drawing too much power or if a light is on or that sort of stuff. I was just testing it and I said, okay, I got the alert, turn the light off. And it really had a lot of trouble with that. Like, it spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the sensor was called and how to turn it off. And I'm not kidding. I was watching the chain of thought and it got to the point where it's like, I can't figure this out. I'm just going to turn all the switches off in the house. And my house just went as if I lost power because it turned off every switch in the house that was currently on. So I had to go and do some manual remediation, and then I scolded it. And I was like, you turned off every switch in the house that was on. And it was like, oh, I'm sorry. Let me turn every switch on the house on. And I was like, it's 8:30 at night. Every switch in the house should not be on. You probably should have only turned on the switches that were previously on. But anyways, everything in my house came on. So it was a little bit of chaos. And that's when Steve learned I probably should only give it read-only for the foreseeable future.
Yikes. So in some way, I mean, it's a little bit less devastating when it's home automation. It's not like your revenue kind of relies on it, but still, it's a perfect example of you let the AI run roughshod, it has the potential to go wrong.
Yeah. Yep. It just will decide. Like if you read the chain of thought, because there's a lot in there, some of it can be very amusing. I have watched it go, I've worked really hard on this and I'm just going to give up. And just like, okay, I guess you're done then. Some of the things that it comes up with when it stops itself and you're like, oh, good, you stopped yourself. Oh no, you made the wrong decision to restart yourself there. Like, good that you were thought, maybe I should. I was watching one today while I was working through work, and it literally said, I should prompt the user for this information. And then it said, but wait, I think I can figure this out. And it just went on its merry way instead of prompting me. Like,
oh, fun stuff with AI. So there's another thing I wanted to get your thoughts on. So one of the things that came out was Mythos. And the idea with Mythos is that there was a number of things that were speculated. One was that it was, so I guess we should back up. Mythos is bug hunting model. And so the idea here is same company, right? So far as I understand is Opus, is Anthropic is going to make this AI model that's going to go through your software and it's going to find all the bugs. It's going to knock on all the doors. It's going to break them all down and tell you where all the problems are so that you can go back and fix it. And they were so concerned about it. It was so good at it because, and I think you made mention this, I can't remember if it was on the air in between, but you basically said it's scary good at chaining stuff together to find ways to get through the back door, right? So as it's doing that, there was some real concern that, hey, we're not real sure how this is going to work out. I mean, what if this falls into the wrong hands? And so they were going to be super cautious, and they were only going to give it to the right people at the right time to make sure that it was handled responsibly. And a couple things came out of that. So the first thing that came out of that was the model got leaked. And
Womp.
yeah, right. Who could have predicted that, right? We were going to keep it safe on the internet, and then that didn't happen. I know, shocking.
Well, let me just correct a statement. The
Sure.
model did not get leaked. That has completely different connotations. What happened was people were able to get unauthorized access, which is different, right? A model leaking is like, hey, it's out there on the internet, and now we know the weights and everything that you know about it. And the other is like, hey, somebody got unauthorized access to use it to do things.
So, pardon my ignorance on this. Can't you just shut the unauthorized access down?
If you've detected it and figured that out, and you know how they got in there, right? Because if you don't know how they've got in there, if you shut that down, that's just going to tip them off that they are now on the radar.
Well, I mean, it was in the news. So, I mean, they have to know.
Right. They have kicked the person out at the point where we're hearing about it on the news.
I see. So this model comes out, and it's the boogeyman on the internet is going to be super bad. It's going to knock all the things. We saw one thing that was talking about how it was going to upend open source, because the argument went like this: open source developers are going to be understandably hesitant to put their code on the internet because these models can go through and chug through it and find all their problems, and so they need to close source them. Do you buy that, Steve?
No, I don't. I think that just becomes security through obscurity. And my proof of that is how many like vulnerabilities in 0 days and exploits do we have for Windows or Mac, right?
Well, to your point, I think the way you said it more succinctly once before was, have you heard of Metasploit? It's like, it's literally the thing they teach you in ethical hacking, as when you want to go discover vulnerabilities, here's a thing that will knock on all the doors and figure out where the weak spots are, so you can daisy chain them together and figure out how to get through the thing, and then you patch it. So, I mean, this is not a new concept, right? So anyway, all that to say, there's a Rip and Good write-up in the Register. We'll have it linked in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Headline: Anthropic super scary bug hunting model is shaping up to be a nothing burger. Anthropic made the Mythos available for preview, but its ever-growing number of organizations under the title so they could fix vulnerabilities. That plan didn't quite work out as intended on Wednesday. They confirmed to the Register that some non-Glasswing partners have had access to the model. Later, they said they were trying to keep the code under wraps. The Mythos breach didn't require a sophisticated attack. Anthropic is announcing a new model. Claimed Mythos identified thousands of high and critical severity vulnerabilities. Another engineer scoured the Mythos-related CVE advisories and the exploit code 244-page system card along with Glasswing agreements. He also looked at the ISLE replication study, which tested Mythos showcase vulnerabilities on small, cheap, open-weight models and found they produced much of the same analysis. So, short version is, this has been here all along, and it continues to be available with things that are not the super scary bug hunting thing. So relax, the world will live on. And you know what? If anything, it's just going to make open source better. Hey, the music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. We record the show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can join us live by going to AskNoahShow.com. You miss it? That's okay. Podcast.AskNoahShow.com. There's every episode all the way back to episode uno.